Hello and welcome into an Irish NFL show special episode with me, Colum Cronin, and I am delighted to be joined by a good friend of the show. It is Zach Segars. Zach, how are you doing, sir?
I am doing terrific, Colin. Thank you so much for having me. Man, we got a lot to talk about. I'm a little feeling good about myself. I had a hot take that was not popular for a long time, and been proven right. So it's nice when you go out on a limb and you're proven correct. So I'm feeling a little smug today, but overall pretty good.
Yeah, well, let's for those of you watching who may not have heard the news. So within the last kind of hour and a half, news out of Denver that Russell Wilson has been benched and that Jared Stidham will start. This really probably a prelude to the fact that the Broncos will be moving on from Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson has enormous amount of money guaranteed for injury. The Broncos a lot of discussion already this week about whether this might happen. It didn't look like they would. Then all of a sudden they are. Zach is mentioning there. This time last year, Zach joined me as we had discussed the Broncos in the doldrums at that point. And Zach had been, I suppose, leading the charge for the Broncos moving on and taking the cap hit early and being in a position earlier to really begin the team building. As it stands, the Broncos are going to have around about 85 million cap hit if they move on from Russ. They can spread that out over a couple of years, but I suppose, Zach, just give me your instant reaction. You talked about being proved right, but were you surprised that this news broke today? Like, it didn't see it. I don't. Were there murmurings on the ground in Denver about this? Because certainly not over here.
No, I was getting ready to throw a fit because if the Broncos are out of the running and they're going to move on from Russ at season's end, if they've already made that evaluation, and one would hope, through 15 games, you've more or less made that decision and you don't really need the two more to finalize anything. If they've decided they don't want Russ back, and they're eliminated from postseason contention, it always made sense to bench him. It's the same thing we've seen the Raiders do with Derek Carr and now Jimmy Garoppolo. Russ has an injury guarantee in his deal where if he gets injured, the Broncos would have to guarantee him $37 million in 2025, another $4 million in 2026. Again, if you've come to the determination you want to get off this guy right now, you don't want to spike back up to over $100 million in dead cap, which would have happened if he got injured and then they still tried to move off him this offseason. So an injury would have forced them likely to keep Russ as their starting quarterback through 2025. That is crazy stakes for meaningless football games. I know the Broncos can technically kind of sneak their way back into the playoffs, but looks very, very far-fetched there. I'm not surprised. I don't know. I guess I'm surprised because it seemed like they weren't going to do it, and I was going to be very mad. But I'm not surprised in the sense that it's the logical move at this point. There's really no other rational answer, I think.
And I suppose, look, the Broncos have had a very odd season to date. We all watched the Miami Dolphins put 70 on them, which led to the Ringer playing dolphin noises during Stephen Ruiz and Nora's podcast. Then they bounce back. They go on this weird run where everything breaks their way, but ultimately, I never felt like they had an offensive identity. They were certainly taking advantage of the bounce of the ball, but it was what did it mean, and how they were winning games. But this, in terms of moving on from Russ, what are your thoughts? We did this last year. We're a year on. Do you see them, spreading it over 2 years? Do you think Stidham is the guy? I'm interested in what way you think this plays out over the next little while, Zach. Oh, we got you on mute. So
This is my classic move. They've got a few options at their disposal here. I do think a cut is still probably most likely, but a trade is more realistic than I think I've given it credit on my past appearances here. Um, I'm still educating myself on all the contract rules. There's a lot of them in the NFL. You learn when you start trying to dissect how the hell can we get out of this albatross. Um, uh, so trade is possible. It would require Russ to waive his no trade clause. I do think that's fairly unlikely, um, just because he'd be effectively foregoing the option to negotiate a new deal for himself. Um, that said, he'd still be making the money he should have made on his own deal uh, for the most part. Um, I don't know. It'll be a calculation for him if that makes sense financially. It's possible he'd be losing on a few $1,000,000. It's possible he could be saving a few $1,000,000, and I think that's millions of dollars. It's likely to impact the decision. Uh, but if he decides to waive that no trade clause, I think he could be appealing to a different NFL team. His This won't be the case for the Broncos, but if the Broncos trade him, they're forced to eat some of that dead cap, um, which makes whatever contract he's on for the team that acquires him way more reduced, way more manageable. You're looking at a cap hit of 17 million in 2024. That's game manager level. That's absolutely doable. And then 37 million in 2025, which is a little steeper, but still isn't that bad. You're looking at overall $27 million a year at the quarterback position. It's like what Jimmy G's making. I think that's pretty much Russ's value. That kind of mid-level vet option we know might not be an elite option anymore in his career, but he can at least be a solid placeholder. I think a team could totally jump on that. You're not going to get a great return, maybe like a fourth, fifth round pick, but the Broncos would save $20 million. So I think they're also motivated to trade him. If they can make something work, it's like 18 to be more specific, but $18 million and like a fourth round pick, that's not a bad deal. I'll take that over cutting him where you get absolutely nothing.
And in terms of like who do you think could be if you were looking around the NFL? And obviously, we know that there are teams that are going to be looking for a QB this season. Are there any spots that jump out to you as you look around the league that they might be willing to take Russ and that contract? As I said, if the Broncos are prepared to eat some of it, and obviously the trade value is likely to be minimal. But is there somebody who jumps out to you that could or that would make sense, Zach?
Maybe the Patriots. I don't think Belichick's coming back, but there's been ties between Belichick and Russ for a while, like mutual respect for each other. And then I also just think, the Patriots are going to be in the quarterback market this year. I feel like they're probably looking to draft a guy, but who knows? That whole situation could be wildly different. But they're definitely going to be shopping for one. The Raiders, they've consistently been on Russ's list of teams he would accept a trade to since moving to Las Vegas. I think they have a house in that area, the Wilson family. They'll be in the quarterback market. Mark Davis likes his splashy moves. I think that makes some deal of sense. The Steelers, another team that, maybe with the pieces they have now, they just want to plug in a appropriately priced veteran and see where they can go from there. Let me see. I don't think the Titans would do it, but the Titans are a team that they've got Will Levis. Sorry, brain fart. Sorry, I'm looking through a list of teams right now. Don't think the Giants would do it because the Daniel Jones hit is still a problem next year. The Commanders showed interest in the past, but that was old ownership. And I feel like they're just going to want a fresh start. They're also very analytically sound and analytically minded as an ownership group. And I don't think that would align with trading for Russ. Don't think Seattle would want him back. Arizona's not going for it. Lions wouldn't. I'd be very surprised if the Vikings, that's just like a worse Kirk Cousins problem. They wouldn't do that. Packers wouldn't. Bears wouldn't because they're going to draft their quarterback. Bucks, I could maybe see the Bucks if you keep DeCamillis. I think Russ and Baker Mayfield are very similar quarterbacks at this point in their careers. I love the Nate Tice comp that Baker Mayfield is kind of Russell Wilson without the athleticism. And as we've seen Wilson's athleticism wane some, they're kind of overlapping more and more. If Baker decides to hit the open market and get a big payday, a relatively big payday, I think that's definitely an option that could make sense. Atlanta, obviously. And then I doubt New Orleans or Carolina do anything. But those teams, Raiders, Bucks, Falcons, I think are the short list of teams I'd maybe circle.
Yeah, I mean, I think by all accounts, the stories are that the Bucks are pretty happy with Baker and he's happy with them. So they'll probably, but I think a lot of the other ones that you mentioned, you might be, depending on the haircut that the Broncos are willing to take. Suppose I want to delve in just a little bit, the trade made sense. Why do you think the Broncos were willing to do the contract extension so early, Zach? And not only like the contract extension, but the clause that essentially has almost forced this, right? Whereby if Wilson was on the roster on the 5th day of the 2024 season, essentially you were guaranteeing 2025 money. So you were doing it so far out, and you were making yourself a hostage to fortune. Whereas it feels like other teams, like even with the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, they gave themselves an out on every season. The Broncos did not do that. Was it just the fact that the QB carousel had become such an albatross around the franchise at that point?
I don't think so, honestly. I think it has a little to do with the precedent of quarterback contracts and how they're changing. I think it was on The Athletic. It could have been like Mina Kimes or something, but I'm pretty confident it was The Athletic. This past offseason had I think like Jason from Over the Cap on to talk about like the Jalen Hurts contract when that happened, because Herbert and Burrow were also on the horizon. And they were talking about this new rolling guarantee model that we're seeing. And that's kind of what this is. So I don't think it's, I don't know. The contract, it's hard for me to separate the contract from the trade. I don't think Russell Wilson's getting traded without that contract. It's so hard for me to imagine a world where any team makes that trade for Russell Wilson and he's playing week 1 without a new contract. I think when you make those sort of deals, and it's not 1-to-1, but I think when you make one of those huge landmark deals, it's almost always paired with an extension, either then or down the road. Now, I don't think it would have happened after last season because last season was such a tire fire. But if he was just like good last season, I think they're maybe looking at still signing him to an extension next season, going, oh, well, Hackett was such a mess and wait till he's with someone else and yada, yada. But maybe they don't. I think anyone signs that contract, and given the trade, and that does not remove George Paton from being blamed. You can look at plenty of data points. Mike Sando's quarterback poll, which asks a bunch of in-league personnel their opinions on the position, being one, or just the reporting from the time of the trade. This is not a deal that every team in the NFL was interested in making. They're like, not to say the Broncos were the only team in on it. Washington was in on it. I believe Philly was rumored to also be in on it. But it's not too often people go, any GM would have made this move. And that is not true. Not any GM would have made this move. And Peyton and ownership deserve some blame for it. I think they were banking on Russell Wilson being a superstar or at least a star quarterback, and he hasn't been that either of these 2 seasons. Their evaluation was off. But I don't, once you make that trade, the contract is coming. I guess I take more issue with the trade than the contract, weirdly, because I think the contract is just a bundle deal at that point.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I wonder if you could have dragged your feet a little bit. Like, yeah, I mean, he's not. I don't think he's accepting the trade without the promise of it. But I just, to me, like, essentially, once you put yourself on the hook for 2 years, you are a complete, hostage to fortune because of, and anything can go wrong. And I get it, like, and I'm somebody who, I fully support players going for fully guaranteed contracts. I think it should be guaranteed in many respects, but you also have to have possibly outs on both sides. I suppose in terms of looking at it, like and I know I think it was James Palmer talked about this. They had the quad box or even more on NFL Network, where they had the five insiders discussing this, Zach. And James Palmer kind of talked about the fact that Sean Payton went out of his way to get a deal done with Stidham as a backup pretty quickly once he kind of came in, and to pay him decent money. Do you think this is an audition for Stidham to potentially be the starter next season? Oh, we got to get you off mute again.
God, I'm the worst. Sorry, I'm looking up numbers and stuff, and then I have my StreamYard in a different window, and rough performance for me today. Excuse me. Yeah, I think Stidham is getting an audition right now. They're paying him, I think, the second biggest backup contract. It was at least the second biggest one signed this offseason. Only Jacoby Brissett signed for more. So he's definitely, and there is guaranteed money going into next season. So they're on the hook somewhat for him. I don't think they'd like to ideally eat additional dead money at the quarterback position. So there's, with the Russ cut, I think a good chance Stidham is on the roster next year. Next year's roster is probably a mid-level veteran of some sort, bridge option of some sort, paired with a rookie. And I could see that being different flavors. I could see that being Jarrett Stidham as the veteran bridge, and I could see Jaden Daniels as like a first-round pick quarterback guy. Or I could see the Broncos waiting till the middle rounds for like a Spencer Pratt or something, and signing maybe a more legitimate veteran option. Sorry, got a call. I'm so this is a terrible podcast performance for me, everybody. I am, oh my God. But it is an audition for him because I don't know. They're going to need a vet option of some sort. Maybe it is a higher level option, like a Jacoby Brissett paired with a lower end rookie. It could even be two vets. It could be a Brissett and a Stidham, and Stidham's the backup. But I think so much of that is going to depend on how he looks down the stretch here. Do you feel good about him starting for you for a season? Not that he's like a difference-making quarterback, but do you think you can be respectable? That's the big thing. You don't want to trot out, I don't know, an unplayable quarterback that's just going to stop you from evaluating your roster. You need something there. If Stidham can prove to be that, I think there's a great chance over these two games, and it is a very small sample, but if he looks like he can be that, I think there's a very good chance he is the Broncos starter week 1 of 2024. If he struggles, I mean, maybe he's still on the roster as a backup. I'm not going to say it's done and he's gone, but there's no way you can install him as the week 1 starter. You have to have a different option that people can get excited about, whether that be a Jacoby Brissett or like a Baker Mayfield. I agree with you. He's probably back to Tampa, but one of those maybe higher level vet options, or a Jaden Daniels if Stidham looks bad. You just can't. You can't run it back with him. But if he looks good, and I do think there's a non-zero chance he looks good, because this offense is so dysfunctional now because Sean Payton has zero trust for Russell Wilson. And I think it's fair to say he's being too conservative and too untrusting. I think it's well earned, but he is being hyper conservative. And like, this isn't a training wheels offense. It's a big wheels offense. I don't know. If Stidham runs a real NFL offense, there's a chance that just opening up the playbook is enough for things to take a leap.
I suppose, like, to me, I had hoped that the Broncos banter era, was coming to an end, Zach, and maybe this is the move that needed to be made. You're ripping the Band-Aid off and moving on. But ever since the team, decided, I suppose, not to put an arm around the shoulder of Brock Osweiler after the Super Bowl and kind of leave it a few weeks, and then he didn't come back. And we had obviously Trevor Simeon versus Paxton Lynch. We ran that back a second year. We've seen Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, Teddy Bridgewater, Drew Lock. It has been just never ending. Like, I suppose this is a franchise who, despite the fact, and I repeatedly bring this up, the two greatest QBs that this franchise have had were both number one overall picks, acquired in different ways. But this is a franchise that refuses to pick in the top 10. Do you think that, we talked there, I suppose, about the way they may approach, and realistically, with the ammo that the Broncos have, it's going to be difficult to go up to get probably one of the top prospects. So, do you think they're just going to roll the dice essentially next year, or could you see a world where they do try to put a package together that maybe involves a Pat Surtain trade to get up to get a guy that Sean Payton is a real fan of in the draft?
I think anything's on the table. Chase Daniels, again on The Athletic, was recently talking about how I don't know what it's going to be, but Sean Payton is going to make a splash this offseason. And maybe we'll just define the cutting the Russ move as a splash, but he is a very aggressive coach. You can see this going for it on fourth down in that game against New England on primetime. That just like he is going to be aggressive. Onside kick, very first play as a Broncos head coach, calls an onside kick. He's a riverboat gambler. Riverboat Ron was a nickname Ron Rivera earned ironically because he was so conservative and made one aggressive decision. Sean Payton is actually the riverboat gambler. He is wild. This is a guy who, in the waning years of Drew Brees was gone, right? Or I guess he wasn't part of the organization for the Trevor Penning trade. But I'll still point to the Trevor Penning trade and say that's part of his ethos. He's with God, I'm spacing on the GM right now for this.
Mickey Loomis.
Mickey Loomis, thank you. I always mix up Mickey Loomis and Les Snead. But both of they're cut from that cloth. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to be non-traditional. And I think there's many ways it's damaged the Saints, to be frank. It's something I'm a little worried about. He could be way too aggressive in his roster building. But I would not put it past him to bundle two firsts together, and a Broncos fan base that has been without first round picks is not going to be excited about that. But I wouldn't be surprised in the least if he bundled two first round picks together to move up from, let's say the Broncos end up picking 12, from 12 to 7 to get Jaden Daniels. That seems very much within the realm of possibility to me. I do think it's much easier to do next year. Not only will you have more draft capital at your disposal and a little more cap flexibility to maybe make some elements of that trade work, but you're also going to be further removed from Russ's dead cap hits. He's got an $85 million dead cap hit. Broncos are probably going to want to spread that over 2 seasons. If you draft a rookie quarterback this year, there goes 2 cheap rookie quarterback years, burned out the window. They might as well be expensive quarterback years because that's the money you're allocating to the position. And then you'll get cheap years in 26, 27, 28, which is probably when this team is more ready to compete at a high level anyways. Could line up totally fine, but you are wasting a large chunk of the competitive advantage that a rookie quarterback contract provides.
Yeah, and maybe on that, because we got a question, I suppose, and I just thought it was interesting because, yeah, you have that, but we have seen teams, I suppose, be able to live with that. Obviously, the Eagles are one example. The Packers, in terms of moving on from Aaron Rodgers and the dead cap there, and obviously the Bucs this year. Now the Bucs have got a different model. They went with Baker Mayfield. It was a kind of a last chance saloon type of situation for Baker, and he looks to have matured. I know this might be a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but we have a question from Andy Arkins, Zach, in terms of wondering, and be good to get your opinion as somebody, obviously you cover the Broncos with the Let's Talk Broncos podcast. But for you, I suppose, in terms of, and we've talked a little bit about QB contracts, but for Jordan Love, what has been, have you been, what have been your thoughts on Jordan Love? What kind of contract would you be willing? I know Sheil on the Ringer podcast was happy to give Jordan Love all of the money, but what sort of a deal would you be willing to give to Jordan Love? We got you on mute again. We got to get you off that.
Dude, I'm the worst. I'm so sorry, Colum. I'm gonna send you a fruit basket for how up my own butt I've been on this podcast. I'm so sorry. So I think in terms of what I'd be willing to give Jordan Love, there's still this kind of chasm in the quarterback market right now where you've got like Jordan Love at 13.5. I'm talking about this current season. Then like Jimmy G at 25 and Geno at 25. Tannehill at 29.5. Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff in that 35-ish range. Derek Carr 37. I'd give him a Derek Carr contract. Maybe that's disrespectful. Maybe he doesn't go for it. Maybe it's Derek Carr plus a year of inflation, so it gets up into that 40 mil range. And then with low end guarantees, you're probably looking at. I mean, I don't even know what the guarantees would be because, again, as we talked about with the rolling guarantee thing, these quarterback contracts are a little complicated. But let me see what Derek Carr has. Derek Carr has 100 million gear. Oh yeah, but his contract is so fake.
Yeah, it really is.
Geno's more real. Okay, $25 million contract, 40 guaranteed. Let's say they bump that up. They give him, and then 75 over 3 years. So let's say they give him 120-ish over 3. I'd say kind of Daniel Jones-ish deal is probably what he's getting. 120 to 160 over 3, and then maybe 100 million of that is guaranteed. I'd pretty much give him the Daniel Jones contract.
I suppose just wrapping up, Zach, because at this point the Broncos wide receiver room and tight end room and potentially running back room could look very different in 2024. Sean Payton had said at the start of the season, this season, he was going to be, quote, pissed off if the Broncos didn't make the playoffs. I think we can now all accept that, that's enormously unlikely. What are as we sit here today, and we're not yet even at the end of 2023, but what do you think are your expectations, and what are the franchise's expectations after the tumultuous period? I mean, we're coming on nigh on a decade now. They made the move for Russell Wilson. It hasn't worked out. They're going to move on. They give, up draft capital to go and get Sean Payton. What are the expectations for 2024, do you feel?
I think it's more or less the same. I think the Broncos team will probably finish with a very similar record and ultimately be better. I think this world of big dead cap hits and like contract restructures and kind of like this Saints, Rams, more aggressive young GMs doing crazy things. I don't know if we've totally caught up to what those type of moves mean and what the fallout for them actually entails. The salary cap isn't fake, but it is highly manipulatable. And like the bill comes due eventually. Look at the Saints right now, like stuck paying Cam Jordan $40 million a year for the next 4 years or whatever ridiculous nonsense it is with all their void year. Like it absolutely does come due eventually. But if your ownership is willing to spend cash over cap, which the Broncos ownership is by far the richest in the league, you are able to manipulate it very, very, very heavily. The Broncos will cut Russ this season, and I assume they'll do a post-June cut. None of his cap hits will escalate. They have already budgeted to devote this amount of money to Russell Wilson. Already budgeted for. They're allocating the exact same amount. The difference is he's not on the roster. So what they maybe haven't budgeted for is whatever money they're giving to that next quarterback. Now, if it's a draft pick, they've budgeted for those draft picks. So taken care of. If they sign a guy, that would be unbudgeted money, but you're probably looking at 15 mil AAV, which is relatively easy to scrounge up. The Broncos, with just a few moves, can free up a lot of cap space where they can still be very active this offseason. and I expect them to be. I think this was a good test run for Sean Payton, and he figured out what he likes and he figured out what he doesn't. And part of that's Russell Wilson. He's gonna scrap what he doesn't and keep what he likes and bring in some new guys. And because Cortland Sutton, because Justin Simmons, because Garrett Bowles have all seemingly found a fountain of youth and had their best seasons. And I guess Justin Simmons was amazing last year too, but Simmons kind of maintained his insane level of play, and Bowles and Sutton had their best season since 2019 or 2020. You feel a lot better restructuring those deals now. Restructuring those deals frees up like 50, $60 million, and they don't expire that far down the line. So you're not putting yourself on the hook for a very long period of time. You're making yourself committed to Cortland Sutton for like an extra year, or Garrett Bowles for an extra year, or Simmons for an extra year. Something you probably feel good about right now. You get a big chunk of money. You can invest in this roster that is very talent poor. Quarterback gets discussed a lot, but running back has some serious problems. Wide receiver has some serious problems. Tight end, defensive line, edge, inside linebacker. Safety looks solid, but there are some serious question marks. Cornerback, serious question marks. So like whole every position group on the roster needs to be rebuilt. They're going to need money to do that, and they have avenues to do it. So sorry, I've been very long-winded, Colin, but I do think this team's going to take a step forward next season, but ultimately finish with the same record because their turnover luck was insane this year. They had a month where they had a 3.6 turnovers a game, or takeaways a game rather, 4-0 in those games, 3-8 the rest of the season. I mean, normal turnover luck, this is a 3-8 team. And I don't think that should be lost in the wash. That it is a very flawed team. Serious gains have to be made, really just about every position group.
One final piece, I see Sean Drotar has raised this. Do you think we might see Ben DiNucci also dress on, or is Russ really the gonna be the backup? Are they gonna risk it to put Russ in if Stidham does get injured at the weekend?
I think there's a very good chance. Sorry, I was shaking my head because I was like, no, we're not going to see Ben DiNucci start. I had a Twitter question asking me that. Like, nope, he is not starting. I would not be surprised at all if he's the backup. The last week, I think maybe even the last two, the Broncos have done some practice squad elevation stuff with him. We see teams do that for two reasons. Either one, to stop a guy from getting poached, or two, hey, we like you. This is an easy way to give you more money without it causing us any problems, and just show you, hey, we appreciate you. We like what you're doing. You're still going to be inactive on the game day roster. So we're really, again, not doing much, but it'll get you a bigger game check, get you some more money, show you our appreciation. The Broncos have already done that these past 2 weeks. So I think they clearly do like Ben DiNucci. The fact that they so quickly and so strongly went from like no word about it to, yep, Russ is sitting. We're definitely not playing that guy. Makes me think they understand the injury ramifications. And yeah, I kind of do think it will be Ben DiNucci. I feel like they'd like to put a good face on that for Russ, so he's not like a healthy scratch. I wonder what they'll do, but they can't put him down as injured because then that's the injury guarantee. I wonder if they'll let him, like they'll excuse him or something, like taking time away from the team or something like that, to save face. Not that Russ is a bad, I think he'd totally go along with it. By all accounts, he's a good soldier. But I don't know. That's uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable to be like, not only are we benching you, Russ, but we're going to play Ben DiNucci ahead of you. That's a tough conversation, even if it's the right one.
But they'll have to do it because you can't bench him to avoid injury and then risk it like by putting him in. So certainly, as I said, the Broncos banter era continues. I do think there is a PhD thesis in everything that has gone on in the last nigh on a decade, as I said. Zach, for people watching who want to find more of your stuff, where can they do that?
Unmuted that time. You can find me. Everyone, I promise you, this is such a bad podcast appearance to me. I'm going to be wildly apologetic to Colum in our text chain afterwards. I'm so much more put together normally. This has just been a crazy day in Broncos country. Please go over to our YouTube, Let's Talk Broncos. I'm still conducting some research for a video that I'll have up later today, going through like all the nitty gritty stuff of like what's the roadmap from here on out if the Broncos are going to cut Russ. Talking about the Stidham stuff, talking more about the no trade clause stuff, all the good nitty gritty. How can what moves are the Broncos probably going to make in conjunction with this one to free up 2024 and 2025 cap space? They can free up a ton. We're talking about a team that could pretty easily have $200 million in 2025 cap space. So who knows? Things are going to be changing. Tune in. Let's Talk Broncos. I've got some amazing co-hosts with me that balance me out. So yeah, please go over there. Colum's on the show once, and we're going to get him on more. So do it. Thank you, everybody.
Zach, appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. I mean, I really had hoped that the days. It's funny, I've been doing this podcast and stuff a long time, and I get Lindsay Jones on it at least once a year. And every year since Lindsay has come on, we've talked about the Broncos QB situation. And then the Russ trade happened, and then Lindsay came on, and the contract had been done. And we were like, well, we're probably done chatting about the QB situation for a couple of years, right, Lindsay? And then this year she came back on in August, and and it looks like it very well may be the same again in the future. I cannot advocate checking out Zach's stuff enough. He has the patience of a saint. I don't know how he deals with everything on Twitter. He is happy to answer questions and get into detail. Do check out his videos. Do check out Let's Talk Broncos podcast. And yeah, it never ever dull in Broncos country. Thanks for joining me, Zach, and hopefully have you back on again in the not too distant future.
Hope to be back. Thank you as always.